Hi, I'm Deniz,
And I'm Tom.
and welcome to our podcast, Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
We created our podcast for you, our nonprofit colleagues. As nonprofit professionals with over 50 years of experience combined, we've led nonprofit hospitals, university programs, campaigns that have transformed cities, communities, and campuses. We're from Chicago and Detroit, and now we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our work has taken us across the country from the Midwest to Seattle, to Portland, California, and nationally. We've seen it, lived it, and have learned from it.
We've all been through a lot as nonprofit professionals, and we hear you, we see you, and we understand. We know you too are used to wearing many hats. It can be exhausting, but we come together with the shared mission to transform the world. Because We've Been in Your Shoes is a podcast for you, us, and our entire nonprofit community, sharing and learning from one another so we can continue to innovate and unleash capacity for good. We'll hear from colleagues and peers, discuss emerging issues in the sector, and provide you with key takeaways and useful tips to support you in all you do. We believe that people and philanthropy equal possibilities. Join us on the Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast with new topics and special guests. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited. We're approaching the end of 2021 and we're looking
Yes.
into 2022. So I know we're still in a pandemic, but how do you think the year's gone by?
Like the first year of the pandemic, it's been what a flash. It's gone by so fast in many ways. When you're in it, I wonder, I remember wondering, like, when will this be over? And then at the end of the year, I thought to myself, wow, we've gone through this. We've survived it. We've learned so much. I have to share with you, I've been calling the last year and a half, a year of awareness, a year of education, because I've been learning so much about what's going on around us.
That's a really great way to define it. It's a year of awareness, and I'm hoping 2022 is a year of positive action just around the world. I hope people really look at themselves and the world around them and maybe move into that positive space of impacting their own communities as well as lifting up our humanity. So I think we are ready, and hopefully 2022 brings that.
I really like what you just said because let's face it, in some of the things we're going to be talking about, we've seen a change that's been going on for a number of years. And in many ways, what's happened in the last 2 years, there's almost like this jump start to look at these changes, and the question to me will be, will these changes stay with us? Will we learn even more from it and make it even bigger in terms of some of the technologies we're using to engage more communities? Or will we go back in many ways? And I don't think we are going to go back.
I agree with you. Well, before we jump into some more conversations around what we're experiencing from a nonprofit point of view, as we're both leaders in the space, let's get to know each other and share a little bit about our backgrounds with our audience. How about you go first, Tom?
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. So my name is Tom Bull, but my full name is actually Sylvian Thomas Bull. I've been going by Tom for years. It's just something that I've been using. It was easier to pronounce, easier to, I think, to manage in many ways. But I am first generation American, and I am first generation going to college. So I picked up a lot, learned a lot about that. Born in New York, we moved to Chicago and was really raised on the south side of Chicago before I moved out to Seattle, and then came down to Portland. So I live in Portland and so forth. So what about you? Let's hear a little bit about you.
I am also a first generation American. So, yay for us. I think as kids who are to immigrant parents, you navigate two worlds every single day. And not just culturally, but, you know, the typical norms that are in my family's background. So my name is Deniz Taş Demiroğlu Conger. It is Turkish. For my entire life growing up here, it's been so amazing to see how many people kind of connect the dots to my background and how I find myself connecting the dots to others' backgrounds. And so I think that's also what kind of pulled me into the nonprofit and fundraising space, because I love to hear where people come from, where their stories are from. And I think you get more of that in the nonprofit sector. But a little bit about my background: I grew up in Metro Detroit. It's still a special place in my heart. But over the years, we found ourselves out here in Portland, Oregon. I've had the opportunity also to work and explore some other cities, but definitely now call the Northwest my home. So it's been a wonderful journey. So that's a little bit about my story.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So tell me something. We're going to be talking about our field, right? The community, the people that sent it, and so forth. But how do you get to do what you're doing today? The facts are this: there are no formal educational programs. You don't go into college or even high school thinking, I want to be a fundraiser. I want to be in alumni relations. I want to be, well, maybe marketing communications. But let's hear your journey. How were you introduced to it, and how did you get into it?
Thanks for asking. I don't get asked that very often. And, I think people often think that there is a school. I mean, I think between you and I combined, we do have over 50 years of experience. And so if you even go back 15, 20, 25 years, at least when I started the field, I had the opportunity of being mentored. I was in college. I started fundraising actually as a part of my job working for the University of Michigan radio station. It was a paid position. I was also a student DJ, but it was my first formal job with the responsibility to raise money so we could continue having radio shows. And I created a sponsorship paper, printed it off, created multiple copies, and started going around the local businesses. I did not get rejections. So, who's going to reject a 19-year-old working at a university radio station, particularly since the entire school eats at your cafe? So you're going to probably want to sponsor. So I, thought for myself, wow, this is a pretty easy gig. It was fun to talk about the school and the radio station. And I think that's where I first got kind of, the bug for it. I then really, where I honed my craft and my skills around it was through a mentor. So having the opportunity of having one of the best bosses I ever had um, early in my career, just in my 20s, that individual brought me along to every meeting that he had, every board meeting, every donor visit, wanted to really give me the best experience of seeing fundraising in action, and especially major gifts. So I would say that would be how I kind of, I don't want to say stumbled into it, but how I was introduced into the field. And learning from the best, you don't get bad habits. So, what about you? How did you kind of find yourself in a fundraising nonprofit position?
Yeah. Let me just say, hey, thanks for sharing that information because I think that's pretty inspiring. And I'm hoping that newer, younger people that want to get into field learn something from what you just said. For me, I started by volunteering. In high school, I volunteered a lot. And then right after high school, I was volunteering for a number of different things. And there was always a fundraising component to it, but I didn't think about it as fundraising. In college, I was heavily involved as a student. I was in the fraternity, I was in the student government, blah, 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 blah. Just lots of stuff I was involved in. And so when I finally graduated, I actually went into the field of HR, and I did that for about 2 years. Call me back to do fundraising, but they referred to as development. Come back and do development, and I didn't know what that was. I honestly did not know what that was, but it was paying more money. It was a nice title, and I said, okay, I'll come back and do it. When I went in, I don't think I was mentored really well, to be quite honest with you. And so it was more like I was learning about it. I was, trial and error. It was really a moment where I had to figure things out on my own. So I thought to myself, this feels not for me, but I really enjoyed the volunteering part of it, engaging with community, especially alumni, and getting them connected to the university. And through that process, I realized that connection fundraising was part of it. Engagement that we use that title now, but it wasn't part of that. That word wasn't being used in 1995.
No, it
So
wasn't.
It was not, yeah. So that's how I got into it. And I slowly learned more and more about it. I became much more comfortable. And one of the key factors for me was learning how to engage alumni. And the key word I remember asking alumni is like, tell me why you are still connected to this organization. And that's how it opened up windows and opportunities for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, because I also have worked in higher ed fundraising, and especially when you work for an organization, maybe you didn't go to school there, or you're, not necessarily from that area. But one of the things that I learned being mentored in the field is looking at places of a little bit around life milestones and transitions. So everyone can speak from a place of when you transitioned from high school into college. It was a transformative moment for you. And to speak to that of around a shared experience, that's how you can also make connections with donors, with alumni, with really anybody. So as long as you can find those connection points that you can share with someone, and that 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 person may be able to share a little bit of that experience. But I definitely hear you that, at least for me, mentoring was key for me to stay in the field as well.
Yes, I have to agree with that. What we're going to be talking about is our colleagues a lot throughout throughout the series, right? And definitely mentoring, connecting to people that helps us. We connect to people that we have joy with, that we've learned from, that are mentors to us, but also we are mentors to other people in our field as well. So that
Exactly.
was keeps us all together, and we're learning from each other and so forth. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey, and I've learned so much, and I'm still learning, still learning.
Me too. I mean, it's a way about, I think mentoring is such an important thing. I'm actually mentoring a couple people right now, and it's, you're paying it forward. I, as a mentee, really, it was transformative for me to have someone believe in me and willing to share with me how they build for success. The other thing I would say, because there isn't necessarily school for it, is I read a lot. I think when you, especially in the early 2000s, to be an effective fundraiser, we were still, we didn't really have smartphones, but we needed to build connections and ties to people. And so using the phone and, I don't want to say cold call, but trying to connect with people, the important thing was also for me was reading a lot. So I read tech news, healthcare news, education news, global news, financial news, anything I could get my hands on to really become very well versed, and especially well versed around the issues that impact the organization that I was working for at the time. And so in healthcare and hospital systems, really understanding payable, billable services. What does that look like? What's the delta in your funding gap? All of that kind of stuff. My mentor taught me the importance of reading about things that are impacting your organization, because individual donors, foundations, corporations, they'll come to you. They may want to learn more before they make a commitment and invest. But if you, as a effective development officer, can have a conversation and drive that donor to think about all of the angles that your organization can be a part of how they approach their philanthropy, I think you can be pretty effective too that way.
I agree with you on many of those elements you just talked about. One of the things for me was volunteering. I want to circle back to that, and I'll tell you why. With volunteering, what I learned about myself, I was much more confident if I was volunteering, and I could, in many ways, learn from that experience. Because if I was in those early days when I was doing it as a career, I became much more nervous because I could make a mistake, and that could mean something damaging can happen. As a volunteer, I felt much more freer to make these move forward and make decisions, right? And the thing about it, I was making good decisions. So I had to remember, I had to realize, take that experience and move it into my work life, in terms of like my careers. I didn't have to just do it in the volunteer. And so why was I separating those two things at that time? I don't know. But I learned over the years to combine those two things together. I can take what I do as a volunteer and move it into my work life, and it was the same results. The other thing I'll mention is data.
Oh,
Um,
data is the most important thing to me. Yeah.
Oh, so true. The reason why I bring this up is those early days when I was a fundraiser, I was given a list, call these people.
Yep.
That was really challenging, right? That was challenging because I'm like, well, what's the background? Are these people connected? How are they connected? Later on, when I've learned that you can look at data and see, well, this person is connected this way, and this is what their past experience have been, their past giving, I could then use that information to connect. And I knew in terms of predictive modeling that these people were more likely to give or support than people that were just out in the middle of nowhere. And I mean that in the sense of that they have not been connected to their organization before. So I had better information and a better way to either connect them because they're already connected, or if they're not connected, introduce them to the organization. So later on and throughout the years, I started using much data to make those decisions.
That's a really great transition point into, I know we want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing today in the nonprofit space. And just to recap, I mean, for both of us, it sounds like mentoring was key, volunteering, reading a lot, and then also data. Those, I think, four things really kind of sum up, at least in our profession and how we were able to come into the field, those bits of, yeah, activity.
Yep. Yes.
So,
Agreed.
yeah.
So I want to say that one of the things that we're going to talk about, as you said, transitioning, we're going to start talking about what is the future? What do we see coming down the line? And also, what did we see coming down the line 3 years ago? Is it stronger or has some things pulled back? I'll tell you, I think about young people and new people in the way they give. There's always been a bunch of complaints or concern that young people don't give. And what I realized looking at data and research, that wasn't true. What they are giving towards were the social justice causes. That started
Yes,
happening several years ago. And I
I
serve
agree.
on, right? And I serve on admissions council. And so we interview and read applications for students and we interview them. And one of the things I started picking up on more than 3, 4 years ago was that generally speaking, students were interested in social justice causes. And so that shift was coming on a lot more sooner than I thought it was going to come on. I was so like, oh my gosh, all these 80% of the students were thinking social justice. And then about 2 years ago, I noticed that their giving was going towards social justice causes. And so my colleague and I were asking the question, well, one of my colleagues said to me, young people don't give. And I pushed back. I'm like, young people are giving. They're not giving towards universities because we have not made it clear that we have these social justice causes within the university.
That's true. That's very true. I mean, universities and college campuses are where a lot of students can transform cultures beyond their campuses. And that's exactly true. I think a lot of people don't see universities and colleges as areas in which to make contributions that affect social change. They're one of the best environments in which to not just do research analysis and policy development, but how do you bring in shifting organizations from a charity mindset to a social justice mindset. I think universities can support uh, many projects and endeavors that way. That can also go into supporting law schools, even thinking about how students access resources on campus, having tools to learn from, being exposed to these trends that are impacting us around the world. Um, yeah, that's true. I have noticed that students, young people do give. And as you said, they started giving probably to social justice causes about 5 years ago.
Yep.
And so, into speaking to that, I have seen that trend come mainstream. I think more so the pandemic
Yep.
has revealed the importance of investing in organizations that traditionally have been overlooked. BIPOC led organizations, I think, have become a priority for people in their philanthropy, as they should be. And definitely one of the things I've seen in 2021 is foundations really assessing and reevaluating how they become more accessible and equitable in their grant making. And so that's been
That's right.
something that I've seen in this past year too. But yes, I hear you on that.
hmm the other thing I want to mention also is technology. I think about one of the things that we saw shifting way back in 2017 is crowdsourcing
Yes.
and how universities were using it. Now, From within, internally, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's exhausting. And I think that's why some organizations are like, we're not going to do that. But I'm not sure if that's the right attitude to take. If that's the way people were connecting to us to support whatever the causes may be, then we need to figure that out. Hopefully, we have figured that out, but I think we still have a long way to go. But crowdsourcing was great. I'm going to just name some things off, and we can always come back and talk more about this in details. But I think about digital wallets. How
Yeah.
are we using digital wallets? Could that be an opportunity for universities and organizations to connect to their donors, alumni, friends? I think about Google Pay, Apple Pay.
Hmm.
How are we using that to connect? And I don't think organizations, or at least universities, are using Google and Apple Pay yet. It might be something we need to start to look into. And I don't know if there's a fee cost or anything of that nature, but I'm sure we can partner and find ways. So those are some of the things I began to think about as we move into this next year.
Hmm.
In the coming years, we're going to have to find opportunities using technologies to engage a much larger crowd in a way that's going to give our donor base options.
Options. I think that's key. That's also what I think I hear people want a little bit more transparency, access to the information that, their gifts are doing X, Y, and Z as they're intended to do. So I can hear also the ease of giving.
Yep.
How can we make it easier? I mean, that's the other thing is, when you go to a nonprofit's website and you hear from the donor those pain points of trying to find your give button, or the
Mm.
give button doesn't work on this browser. I have to download a different browser. I mean, those are things to, here, even at this day and age, that technology and a lot of nonprofits have not been able to be responsive in those technologies and tools. So I think
Mhm.
finding ease of giving is also something that people are still, it's a priority.
Yeah, yeah, and I should mention Venmo is one, but also I don't know much about cryptocurrency. It's something I know
Yeah.
some universities have looked at. I don't know if you know more about that, and if so, we should share it.
I think that is such an exciting area with blockchain and cryptocurrencies. How is that, I guess, harnessed and utilized by the nonprofit NGO sector? I don't really know the complexities of getting that together, but I do know some organizations are exploring how to accept Bitcoin as contributions. And I think the important thing is for every organization to have an entity or a group of people really exploring innovative ways to expand fundraising and development models that harness not just digital tools but look at the innovation that's happening in the financial sector. And that's not just giving, it's also how foundations are making investments. How are those fields and mechanisms in finance really impacting organizations that, may have 60 people on staff with a $8 million budget? That's a whole nother area that I'm looking forward to diving
Mm.
into as we move into the new year. And I think the more we get into it, perhaps we identify a special guest speaker to talk to us a little bit more about the intersection of nonprofits and cryptocurrencies.
I agree. And as we think about the new year, as we think about what happened this year and last year, events
Yeah.
have changed. And it is still changing. At one point, we thought we were going to go back into some type of hybrid model. It looks, as I was reading articles today, a number of companies, banking industries are going back 100%. They are going back now saying, you know what? We thought we were going to bring in people, we're going to come into the office 1, 2, 3 times a week. We have now pulled back. Their Christmas events and holiday events, they have pulled back on. Events, we have changed it. We now know that events are happening on YouTube and live streaming. There are a number of opportunities out there with both YouTube and, like I said, Zoom has become really big. Google Connect or Google Outreach,
Oh, yeah.
all those. How are we using that? Are people
Yeah.
engaged that same way? And a lot of jokes and people talked about, well, older people won't want to do that. That we know that's not true anymore. That people were engaging from all over the
Yes.
place. So is that the future now?
Yeah. I don't know. They pose that question having done huge events. You know, the energy of being in a room with 700 people and celebrating a shared fundraising goal is exhilarating to be a part of. Collective philanthropy happening right before your eyes is a fun experience. I've done so many events that, you know, in person, they're transformative experiences sometimes for the donor and, everyone involved. When you've done virtual events, you definitely lose that. But I hear also people are kind of zoomed out on virtual events. They're not necessarily not interested in supporting the organization, but it's just challenging to be visually overly stimulated, let's say, and captive for an online 2 hour program. So I don't know if virtual events can be sustained in the long run. I think what we're going to see, if we're going to talk a little bit about trends that are coming into 2022, I think more organizations are going to slowly do more hybrid models um, for their events. So they may take a traditional gala and break that up into smaller events over the course of a year. So instead of holding one massive 600-person event, you might do two or three, and maybe make those a little bit more meaningful and impactful. And so I'm hearing that as options for people. People are a little bit more comfortable entering a space with 50 people as opposed to 500. Uh, so that could be, something that, we're going to see as a trend.
Hmm. And we did see some things that were pretty amazing working with some of the colleges and universities I've been working with in the last year and a half. We saw a much more larger increased participation because people could come from all over the world to a Zoom event, and people were doing it from across the country. People were doing it. For example, I'll mention Caltech. Caltech saw an increase by over 1,000 people coming to one of their
Wow,
events. In the past, has been 500 people. So we had to think about parents are now able to go. People or who are caretakers are now able to go. People that are working full time.
that's a great point.
Guess what? They don't have to fly anymore, get hotel rooms. So that's something we have to look at. But also, I'm going to say this was happening a long time even before the pandemic. Younger, newer people didn't like or do not like sit down dinners. They want to get in and do receptions, have some fun, and move on. I think mature generations are still used to, I want to sit down and be engaged with my friends and hear this thing. So I did see that gap going on. Will that change as we move forward? I don't know. But it's something to think about as well.
Hmm.
Uh, Definitely something to think about. I'm going to switch over a little bit, still talking about engagement, but as you know, texting. Let's talk about texting. We've been texting a lot more. Um, at one point, I thought messages would be coming out through our phone to give money. That hasn't really picked up. I think some people found that kind of annoying. I don't know. But text for when it comes for advocating has picked up, advocating for certain areas, but not for fundraising.
Yes,
So what are your thoughts about that?
I agree with you. Text to give has not taken off the way I think people had envisioned it would. People are willing to receive texts of when their Amazon delivery is coming to their front door, and that it's been delivered, but they're not so willing to see a message from their local neighborhood, nonprofit to fund their programming. People just see that as an invasion of privacy. And I think the trends have shown, we'll dive more into this, I'm sure, in another episode, because this is an area where I kind of geek out. But the trends have shown that people tend to freely give their mailing address, but their email and their text is kind of more of a privacy issue. And so people get really insulted and they feel it as spam if they get a communication on their mobile device that they may not remember they signed up for. So I think text to give has not, I don't think it's really taken the, path that
Mm,
people envisioned for many reasons. Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because sometimes when I see things, I don't trust it because I'm like, wait, who are you? Is this for real? Eventually, some things we should think about covering in the future,
Yes.
recurring giving. sometimes it's automatic. Is that going to be a thing? Or I'm one of these people that I want to go in and say, yes, I want to give, and yes, I want to pay my bill. I don't like an automatic thing happening. So, that's something to talk about. What about, workplace giving? That's, I think, a discussion I would love to talk about, but also Giving Tuesdays. And here's why I challenge Giving Tuesdays. This year, I got 17 messages because I'm connected to organizations. Give on Tuesday. And I thought, this is a little kind of much now, And, I can pick the top 3 and just support that. But when I think about the different organizations I'm part of, it's important to me. And I may give little here, big here, but 17 Giving Tuesday messages in one day. And I counted, thinking to myself, I want to bring this up. How are people feeling about that? Or have we gotten out of control Giving Tuesday? I don't know.
I hear you there. I think Giving Tuesday, I have never had success. I've always had success in my fundraising programs, right? You want to say that? But I've never had success on a Giving Tuesday. I don't know any organization that has really benefited from investing a lot of time marketing for it. I think universities that do their own giving days, I think those are powerful. I think organizations creating their own giving days or giving weeks have experienced those as being more successful than Giving Tuesday. I also think it's a time of year that I understand the messaging, but it's also a time of year that is quite stressful for many people for a number of reasons. The holidays aren't necessarily always a positive. And so I think adding yet another component to a busy week when you've got Cyber Saturday, Shop Small Sunday, I think that's what it's called, Cyber Monday. Um, what's the other one? Black Friday. I mean, I think that's kind of overwhelming, and I don't think the giving message really fits within that series of really spending money is different than giving money. It's
Mhm.
a different mindset. It's a different experience the person goes through. And I think it needs to have its own dedicated space that's kind of a standalone, not a piggyback to something that has been so commercialized that people overlook it.
I agree. In fact, what you were saying earlier, I was pushing some organizations to get away from Giving Tuesdays and focus on their founding. So instead of doing it on Giving Tuesday, focus on your founding date. Use
That's
that,
excellent. Yeah,
for example, right? And that way it gets away from Giving Tuesday. But also, you mentioned about the doing so much within that holiday, and we have to also remember, the week of Thanksgiving. On Friday is also Native American Heritage Day on that Friday after Thanksgiving.
exactly.
And having friends that are Native Americans, they have talked about what that means to them to have all that stuff going on in that same week. To be on Black Friday, that's one friend said they found it very offensive. And let me just put it out there. And I thought to myself, I honestly did not think about that, but now I have more awareness of it. We talked about earlier
Mhm.
about this 2 years have been an awareness year and learning from our colleagues and friends. So it was a great learning experience for me.
Yeah. Well, building on, this year being a year of awareness, as we look into 2022, I have some thoughts where some emerging trends in the nonprofit space, particularly in development, will go. But before I share mine, I'd love to hear where you think or what we think we might see in 2022 as to trends for the sector.
Wow, that is a good question. Um, that is a good question. One of the things I still think about before we even move into building these programs, where will we be working? For example, can I now fundraise for a school in New York and still live in the Pacific Northwest? Do I need to physically be
Great
on
question.
campus, right? I mean, let's face it, being on campus brings a certain amount of energy. I'm involved, I'm connected to students, I'm seeing what's going on. It engages me, it inspires me. So if I'm off campus, is that the same thing? Can I speak a certain way? So I think that's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Hmm. I definitely, as I shared before, the idea of people having a gala where there's a captive audience of 500 people collectively giving, there is some energy to be said to be a part of that experience.
Mhm.
And that does come from being in person on site. I do, however, want to say one of the trends that I have seen this year, which I hope continues and deepens, is nonprofits that are hiring remote and virtual
Mm.
teams. I actually find that because we're moving more into digital giving, more so, I mean, people are getting, their fundraising programs lined up around not just digital platforms, but really creating more ease of giving, including major gifts that are easier to commit to. I think having remote teams also, I don't think it's a bad
Yeah.
thing. In some ways, there's efficiency, but I do feel it's important to bring people together, whether it's a virtual team or at least one or two staff that are virtual or distant from maybe the headquarters or the center where the organization is. Um, Bring them together when you bring your board members together. But I do think people can get a lot of work done virtually. And in some ways, there's a commitment of follow through, trust, values when you build a remote and virtual team, especially nonprofit leadership. When you're hiring people with those skill sets and backgrounds, they're coming to the table with a whole range of skills and experience navigating, whether they're on site or virtually. I think people can still bring their A game, and not necessarily have to be on site. But there is also something to be said about being on a campus, being in the museum if you work in an arts organization or in the theater. There is something about being in that space which is inspiring
That's right.
too. So, there could be more increased hybrid models, but I like the trend of seeing people can work remotely, especially nonprofit leaders. I think I like that
Yes,
trend.
yes. And before I just want to plug this. As our audience are listening to us, maybe there are some things out there that we haven't talked about. So, audience members, send us a message. Let us know if you would like to see some things that you would like to have us discuss. Also, let us know if you want to be a guest to talk about that thing that you're an expert in, to talk about what the future may look like for us. We mentioned a number of things that we're going to circle back to touch on. And so definitely we're going to keep a list going, and hopefully we will be able to touch on all those items this year. Uh, yes.
Yeah, definitely. We're open to having our community of nonprofit colleagues and peers join us on Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast, creating opportunities to also ask you for your opinions and thoughts, reading your questions, and then inviting guests that really are across sector, from arts organizations to major universities to healthcare systems to large humanitarian relief organizations. So we're looking to bring a huge range of experts, people working every day towards making the world better. But one of the other things before we kind of sign off here, I was interested to, maybe we'll dive a little bit deeper, is to talk about foundations and donor advised funds. I think one of the trends that I have seen in 2021 is more and more people are giving to donor advised funds. I know a lot of people aren't really happy about that because the impact of giving to a donor advised fund versus an organization outright is significant. Um, but also it doesn't sustain the giving either, for that individual, maybe to be able to make that impactful gift. And so that's an area and a topic that I'm also excited to explore more about. But I do see donor advised funds for 2022 become an increased area where people are going to increase their philanthropic commitments. So that gives them a little bit more control and options to impact maybe a lot more organizations, but with smaller gifts. uh, Time will tell, but I think that's increasingly becoming a pretty interesting area of giving for people.
Agreed. And the last thing I'll mention is that we're going to actually bring in some human resources professionals to talk about trends what's going on, especially in terms of hiring within our field, and what are some of the tips and so forth they can share with us, but also paying attention to hiring people of a diverse background. We're seeing some changes in that. And then what type of training and education should our colleagues have as they lead people with diverse backgrounds? So although we're going to talk a lot about fundraising, alumni relations, and everything else, there are going to be times we're going to go outside of that field. But whereas those things outside the field do touches on us, and it affects how we recruit and retain our professionals.
I agree. Hiring and building more diverse teams, leading organizations through justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in your hiring practices. Um, I've, I've built very diverse teams nationally and locally here in the Northwest, and I can tell you there's a lot of thoughtfulness and engagement that you get when you build a more inclusive hiring practice from everyone involved in the organization and including the candidates. So I'm really excited to hear, and as we bring in some of those HR hiring experts as to the trends, because I think nonprofits also have to be mindful of who they're serving, who's on the board, and then who the staff are, and so that it's reflective of a diverse and equitable culture.
Great.
So until next time, Tom,
Yes.
I hope you have a great rest of your week, and looking forward to exploring more topics.
Yes.
Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
Join us next time as we share, advocate, and highlight experiences and ideals from nonprofit colleagues, leaders, and champions.
Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes.